G'day guys, and welcome back to the Hobby Hatch. In this video, I'll be going through how I made this Warhammer 40k inspired dogfight diorama, discussing the techniques I used as we go. So to get started, I 3D printed these awesome Warhammer 40k inspired vector craft, one Thunderbolt and one Hellblade. First off, we'll be giving all of our attention to the Thunderbolt, and after priming the model black, I used my airbrush to give the entire model a pre-shade using titanium white ink. I had the idea of the plane dipping down to the left towards the light source, so I focused on adding the light volumes to the top and left side of its fuselage. With the pre-shade complete, I made a thin mixture of Vallejo Aquamarine and Citadel's Dawnstone, which I used over the entire pre-shade to give it a desaturated bluey-grey tone. Here we can see how the pre-shade lets more of the blue tone show through in areas of the model that we want lighter, while maintaining those darker areas. Next, I wanted to push the highlights even more, so I went over the highlighted areas of the model with Vallejo Verdigris, but in the end, this came out looking too desaturated, so instead I used a thinned out mixture of aquamarine, which gave the model the colour that was best described as blue milk. To push the blue into the shadows, I used a thinned out mixture of turquoise in all the darker areas, which bumped up the model's overall saturation. Next, I moved on to metallics. Usually I like the way straight true metallic metal paints look, but recently I've moved away from purely painting them onto metallic sections, at least for silvers and gunmetal colours. Instead, I usually use a dark grey, like in this case Eschen grey, to base coat all the areas of the model that are going to be metallic, and then overbrushing whichever true metallic metal tone I want it to be after. For this instance, I used Vallejo Model S Steel, which is a very bright silvery colour from their airbrush range. It's made for airbrushes, but I find myself using it for brush painting more often than not. It's definitely a good one to pick up if you've been looking for a bright silver workhorse paint. With the metallics done, I got started on the cockpit. For this, I wanted a simple sun reflection effect through orange tinted glass. As you may know, orange paint has notoriously bad coverage, so first I base coated the side panel with flat white. With the orange base coat solid enough, I begin to add my reflection highlight. These were positioned right in the top left corner of the cockpit window to be consistent with the light direction I chose for the fuselage. I worked up through the base orange tone all the way through to yellow, and finally gave the brightest part of the reflection a dot of pure white. It's important when painting your own reflections to remember that most reflections we see in our day-to-day lives are accompanied by weaker secondary reflections. So to really sell the idea that this window is reflective, and trick the brain to believing it's a reflective material, I added a weaker secondary reflection to the opposite corner of the glass panel. I painted each of the other glass panels in the exact same way, ensuring the brightest highlight was consistent with my chosen direction of the scene sliding. After this, I moved on to decals and weathering. Before adding any decals, I sprayed the entire model with a polyurethane gloss varnish. This simply acts to protect the paintwork underneath and gives you a little bit more freedom when trying to get the decal placement just right. I decided this model would be dubbed Lucky 22 and picked its serial number to suit. After the decals were in place, gave the entire model a wash with burnt umber oil paint, thinned with odourless mineral spirits. Any areas that were too grimy were tidied up with a Q-tip dipped in mineral spirits. Once the oil wash had dried, I pushed back the gloss effect with satin polyurethane varnish. With the model having a satin finish, I sprayed straight Agrax Earthshade wash through my airbrush around and on the engines to give the effect of soot buildup or carbonization as a result of the thrusters burning. Once dry, I began adding chipping to the model using Rhinox Hide by Citadel, focusing on areas that were likely to get more wear and tear, these being sharper edges, corners, or areas where it's likely to have been impacted by munitions while out on a mission. Vallejo Model S steel was used sparingly to add areas where more recent damage had taken place. I almost exclusively used the metallic weathering to areas that had already had previous weathering. Off camera, I then painted the lens effects for the las guns on the front of the plane and considered this Thunderbolt done. I then moved on to painting the Hellblade. Many of the techniques I used to paint the Hellblade were similar, if not the same as the ones I used to paint the Thunderbolt, so I won't bore you with going into the same detail as I already have. First step was to give the prime model a pre-shade with white. After that, I gave the entire model a thin coat of Corn Red by Citadel. I then gave the Corn Red a highlight of Vermilion by Vallejo Model Color. A final highlight of Wild Rider Red by Citadel was used to increase the overall saturation of the model. With the base colours sprayed down, I painted in the metallic trim using the same techniques as before, but instead substituting the metallic overbrush with Scale 75's Metal and Alchemy Black Metal instead of our usual Vallejo Model Air Steel. I then painted the cockpit glass the same way as the Thunderbolt, but instead went for a blue glass colour to contrast the warm tones of the bodywork. After spraying the model with a polyurethane gloss varnish, I added some chaosy decals I found in the Legions Imperialis Epic Scale Questoris Knight kit. Due to their much smaller size, they seem to work well for this scale. I ended up stuffing up the placement of one of the wing decals and pulled up the varnish layer and some of the base coat underneath when trying to remove it. Thankfully, we could just write it off as free battle damage and touch it up in the weathering stage. I covered the plane to burnt umber oil wash, and after that had dried, a satin varnish was applied. I then gave the engine the same treatment with Agrax Earthshade as I did to the Thunderbolt. The entire model was weathered in the same way as the Thunderbolt, using Ronoxide and Vallejo Model Air steel. And after that, I called the model done. With this diorama, I thought it'd be fun to airbrush a background, kinda like the ones you see behind the animal displays at the museum. Now, I am by no means an airbrush artist, and this is my first attempt at something like this, but I'll take you through the process. I found an excellent video explaining how to paint something like this over on the Art Workshop's YouTube channel, so if you're interested in doing something like this yourself, I'll leave a link to their video in the description for you to check out. I first attempted to paint a blue gradient from the top of the plastic sheet, ensuring the blue was darkest at the top and lightest at the bottom. I actually ended up changing the colour of the blue to something a little brighter in the end. From there, I used titanium white ink to paint in a plethora of differently shaped and sized clouds. Through the process, I tried to make the top of the clouds generally more opaque. After the background was painted, I moved on to mounting both of the planes onto a wooden base using 2mm brass rods. Once mounted, I wired some yellow 3V LED filaments to each of the engines. I ended up running the circuit up through the brass rods supporting them to the base. The filaments were soldered to the underside of each of the models, connecting them in parallel to a 3V AA battery housing, which was hidden underneath the base and connected to a switch on the side. Once I was happy with the wiring, I pulled apart some cotton balls and glued them to each of the LEDs to simulate an exhaust plume. I then used my butane torch to burn away the cotton's wispy bits. I can't say I wasn't terrified the entire thing was going to go up, but in the end, I seemed to pull it off. For further effect, I tinted the cotton with bright orange ink and sprayed the ends of the exhaust plumes with flat black. The last steps were to paint the base black and glue the background on. After that, it was on to the Glamour Shots. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. If you've enjoyed the video, consider leaving a like and subscribing for more. It's been amazing to see the positive reaction and growth this channel has had in such a short amount of time, so a big thank you to everyone who's stuck around with us over the course of the channel's life. And a big thank you to anyone who's new here. Welcome! It's great to have you around. If you're inclined, definitely check out some of my other videos, they've been a hoot to make. Otherwise, stay tuned, and I'll see you in the next one.